Thanks everybody for joining for the retrospective for 11.8. Appreciate everybody putting in time. I've put the issue at the top of the retrospective, as we all like to do. We start with an issue. This was to primarily track all the different retrospectives that were going on associated with it. Appreciate everybody putting in the time and filling that out, and also correcting it where necessary as we work around their new reorganization. Additional retrospective notes for various teams are below. If I've missed any, please add them, and we appreciate you including those. To kick off, we'll just start with improvement tasks from the last time around. Mech, are you on the line?
Yes, I am. Thank you. So I'll start with the first item. We have captured our work on security merge requests on dev into our metrics dashboard. In total, we had 176 security MRs on the dev instance. Just to give you a brief preview, all the data has been captured and it's reflecting back to the past 2 years. More info is in the issue, so please feel free to click there and take a look. On the second item, it's mine as well. So to improve and iterate on our metrics further, we have moved away from tracking things at the milestone level because it's proven that we don't have great milestone hygiene on both .com and also on our dev instances. As a result, we're moving to track metrics on a time period basis instead. So to extend our throughputs, I have a engineering-wide, company-wide communication issue on the next iteration of metrics further. So please click there and read, and please make your suggestions and discussions. We are also in our latest stages of double checking the data on our new metrics and working closely with Christopher on this as well. On to you, Marin.
Thanks, Mech. So my item was to look into shifting security development work on gitlab.com from dev.gitlab.org. The issue is in the retrospective doc. There is a lot of discussion, and what we've gotten from the discussion is a list of items that need to be completed, vetted by our security team. And once those items are completed, we will proceed with moving with security development on gitlab.com. The details on how that might be looking, you can find in the design docs. So this is going to be an ongoing effort, but there is some progress being made there.
Thanks, Marin. We're going to move back to how we did this in early January, which is I'll summarize what went well this month, and then also what went wrong, and then we'll go through the individuals for how we can improve, just in the interest of keeping to our half-an-hour limit. I'd like to thank everybody again for filling out, putting in lots of information. I'm not going to hit on all the areas because that would take probably over 25 minutes. And I really want to make sure that we have some time at the end to kind of have some collaboration and discussion. So in particular, the areas I want to highlight in the what went well, 3 teams recognized that they're onboarding engineers and that's going well. Most of the information appears to be anecdotal, but very useful in regards to the fact that we've had certain team members who've already started doing merge requests, and also we've had them collaborating really well there. Which is important because, as an example, we've grown by 23 people in the development team in the last 2 months. The next one I want to hit on is number 4, which is the Geekbot Daily Stand-Up for Slack. Sean mentioned that they've set this up so that they can now run their stand-ups async, which is a very useful tool, use of that tool for that. I've talked to Sean outside of this discussion to potentially put this back into the handbook as we'll call it a suggestion of a standard in regards to if new members are coming on board with all the new engineering managers that we have coming on board. Sometimes it's easier to follow a template than to make all the decisions differently based on the team. So that seems to be working well. The third item that I wanted to call out was under the development process. It sounds like we have been both breaking up MRs into much smaller MMRs, which is a very good thing to see happening. Clement and Seth pointed that out. And then the other one is Mex pointing out that we have fewer exceptions, requests, and releases, which is excellent to see as well. I would say that we've stabilized because actually in January and February, we had 3 each. Other interesting note on that is that we've also changed the process. I'm now the approver rather than Eric. He's delegated that pain to me to approve exceptions. So we'll work to keep that down as well. Moving on to what went wrong. The first area to call out is in planning. A number of teams talked about the planning step and the fact that there's a number of different factors. I don't know if I have a common theme there as much as we definitely have some additional work to do, both in clarification of what we're intending to do in a given issue, as well as what the architectural implications are associated with that, as an example. And moving on to reviewers and maintainers, Dylan points out that one of the key aspects here of getting code in is to have it to be reviewed. That's number 3 there, finding reviewers and maintainers. They are seeing issues where basically reviewing the code is taking longer, or finding a reviewer is being challenging. Number 6 is the last area I'll cover in the areas of things that had challenges. The development process. The teams are definitely getting to the point of having smaller broke down MRs, but because of that, there's been more coordination associated with that, is what I read into Clement and Seth's commentary there, as well as adding additional complexity. So that's one thing that we'll have to probably talk about offline with the team is are we actually breaking it down too far? Though ideally we break it down as much as possible. There is a theory of a point where if you break down things too much, it actually causes more trouble than actually helps the situation. Those were the 3 I wanted to call out for things that were challenges for us. The last area that we'll touch on is how we can improve. And I'm actually going to hand off this part, starting with Rachel, if she's available. And if she is not, then we'll move to Mech.
I don't see Rachel on the list right now.
Thanks, Ashton.
Hi, I'll take it over at the second point. So we've started looking into success and failure rates of review apps and smoke tests as well, and looking to increase this. And also the next step forward is to make smoke tests and review apps a mandatory check in CI going forward. And that's how we are planning to move quality closer to the development process. Back to you, Christopher.
Thanks. And for this section, we can just hand off between various folks following in the document. So next is planning. Philippe, you had a commentary.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. We are looking into creating execution plans, which are basically the way we're planning to implement a feature so that we can discuss that early with the reviewer and make sure that we are heading the right direction instead of developing something and then just adding to a developer with something wrong and have to restart from the beginning. So we want to make sure that we are doing the right thing since the beginning. And with that, back to you, Christopher. Thank you.
Thanks, Philippe. Dylan, are you available?
Yeah, so our team started experimenting with doing weekly backlog grooming. We just turned one of our weekly stand-up calls into backlog grooming, where we're looking at upcoming issues to just get everybody's opinion. If they're, they need attention, if we haven't thought something through, we can highlight any concerns we have earlier before we start them. So over to Dower.
Thanks, Dylan. So with a couple of new people having joined the Create team in recent months, our geographical distribution has increased a little bit. And last month, there was one issue in particular where the backend engineer and front-end engineer assigned to the issue ended up having exactly 0 time zone overlap. They had like a 12-hour time zone difference, so no working hour overlap. And of course, we're really good about asynchronous working in general, but if you're the backend engineer and front-end engineer on a particular feature, it's still nice to be able to have some amount of synchronous communication, whether it's on Slack or in the issue or in the occasional video call. So for me, this is something to improve, to kind of look out specifically with the front-end engineering manager to make sure that when we have a feature where we expect that there will need to be some amount of back and forth between back end and front end, that they are at least in time zones with some amount of overlap. I don't know if other teams have been struggling with this or have been dealing with this another way. If so, I'd love to hear their thoughts too. But I'm just gonna take this into account when figuring out who to assign specific work to.
We
Dylan,
had
on to you.
exactly
Oh,
that
sorry, go ahead.
in plan at one point where we just had two people in pretty much opposite time zones, and we just did the same thing. Like, just don't do that again, basically, was the solution.
Yeah. So this is
Definitely
more
feel the
FYI.
pain.
If anyone else runs into this, keep it in mind because I didn't this last time, and I will from now on.
So
Dylan, over to you.
Both Plan and Create have a, sorry to jump in, but both Plan and Create have an interesting opportunity here where I want to say there's headcount in the plan to go to 3 plan teams and 4 Create teams, I want to say. Hopefully I have that right. We could think about, when we grow into these new multiple teams, that we could do it geographically, if it would help with that. We'd have to, figure out how to still align with front end and all the other groups. I don't know that we could ever achieve that across test automation, front end, back end, UX, all the different specialties that we need to collaborate with one another. But it's worth at least looking at, given that we're kind of moving to the next level of scale this year.
I find that within the backend teams itself, it doesn't make that much of a difference because there will be enough overlap between all the various people, and there's always another backend engineer available for review, for example, anyway. It's mostly between backend and front end specifically where this matters. So then if the backend team, the Create team is going to be split up into 3 or 4 over the course of the year. Splitting those up geographically, I don't think that makes that much sense. Although, of course, you wouldn't want the reports to be too far away from their manager for one-on-ones and those kind of things. But when you have backend and front end, interacting or working together, I think this is something to take into account.
Yeah, so that makes sense. Maybe there's something else we could do to, obviously, if we're gonna assume that it's not solvable with geographic distribution, it's going to have to be solved with scheduling. That's sort of a scheduling nightmare for engineering managers, right? Maybe there's something we could do to make that aspect easier. Like we've got this notion of stable counterparts. Maybe hopefully it's not one-to-one. Hopefully it's still many-to-many, but maybe there's ways to identify who can be pairing up on a semi-regular basis according to geography and capturing that, in our team chart or something like that.
So naive question, do we even have a database of what the working hours are for a given individual? Because like one of the things that I've started using is the out of office to kind of check to see, okay, is like a person available? I don't know if we actually have it for like, these are my normal working hours. I've seen a number of folks who definitely have made very explicit in their calendar where their working hours are, but obviously being able to summarize that with your team is, in some way would be useful.
That's what I'm aware of is people setting working hours in Google Calendar. That could be the single source of truth, and we could extract that information and do some kind of clever scheduling thing, or we could, capture it in Team YAML or some other tool, or something. Maybe this is a problem that customers face, and it's a feature that we should build some form of scheduling logic engine.
Hey, Dawe, sorry for charging into your call here, and I'll pretend I didn't hear that feature request. Earlier, I remember like maybe even half a year ago, I've heard that there was the engineering team wanted to move so that the platform would support separating backend and front end. Is that still something that the team wants to do so that it makes it easier so that you can split up issues like that? Or is that something that we don't want to do anymore?
In a lot of cases, the issue itself won't be defined enough yet where backend and frontend can work without any amount of interaction between them, any amount of synchronous interaction anyway. And I think in a lot of cases that's by design because it means that we can kind of hit the ground running and don't need to do too much preparation beforehand, which of course is great in some cases, like what Philippe was describing earlier, but there's also value in just being able to start on the 8th of the month, spend the first couple of days figuring out that stuff together. And that is difficult, obviously, if you're very far away time zone-wise.
All right, thank you, though. That makes sense. And I will put an issue. We do have an issue for the calendaring thing, so.
Can you add that to the document?
I am adding it right now. Thanks, Christopher.
Thanks. Cool. Let's move on to Dylan.
Sure. So we have, for our team, a lot of complex documentation on how to get set up with GDK for local development. And one of the things we want to improve on is reducing the documentation and replacing it with automation, because we're finding that the documentation is still not the easiest to follow. And GDK is meant to automate your setup and things like that. So we're trying to improve on that at the moment to help people onboard and reduce errors. And I have the next item, which is in order to kind of help with our finding reviewer problem, we want our team to start making use of reviewer roulette, which is obvious because we've got that available to us now, which helps. But one of the interesting things kind of I've noticed in the teams, like I've been working with most of the ops teams and CI/CD teams for most of the time, we have just been assigning reviewers, maintainers that are domain experts in CI/CD and ops. So it's a bit of a kind of shift for us to start distributing to maintainers across the company, but ultimately it's probably the only scalable way to go. So that's what we'll be doing. And over to Oswaldo.
All right, if Oswaldo isn't here, I'll just speak to it. Yeah, we realized that there's only one Gitly maintainer. Well, there's only one maintainer right now, and they were out for some of the time last month, which meant that some of our create deliverables that were dependent on some Gitly merge requests ended up missing the feature freeze, or at least being significantly delayed because of it. So I think that's something for us in Gitly team to talk about, is make sure that there's not a bottleneck there. Brett, on to you.
Yeah, I'll take these for Brett and Heinrich because I don't think either of them can make the call today. So I think that we had come up a couple of times in the plan retrospective was the issues with managing two different code bases. So for instance, EE master can often break because we merge something into CE that breaks something in EE, but it doesn't conflict. And this is actually more likely now that we have extracted more code into separate directories because we have fewer conflicts, which means that we create fewer EEMRs as a matter of course. And then Brett also mentioned that just managing two MRs, like in the case where you do create one to E and C, is painful as well, which is basically the same case Heinrich's talking about. Tong added a question in the doc about workarounds to prevent this before the single code base epic is done. I don't really know other than creating an EEMR, which was also one of the problems. Like to solve the second problem, we can do more of the first problem, I guess. Or I don't know if that's a great idea. But the single code base stuff, it looks like we're targeting May for that. I think. Certainly in the epic it seems that way. So if we get a single code base, obviously we basically solve this issue in the best way possible. So I don't know if anybody's got anything to add there. If not, then over to Liam and Dennis.
Yep, I can take it for this. So one thing that we need to work on is just being more communicative as the issues kind of go on through the release or span multiple releases. So a lot of the time that things can appear that nothing's happening or there's no progress being made because we're not commenting on it, or the merge request hasn't yet been linked or anything like that. So this is obviously a problem between teams working across like front and back end and UX, but also for external stakeholders who are watching the issues and watching proposed features and may not actually be able to see what's going on. And then maybe there's just a case where the milestone changes, but there's really nothing being said about it. So even if there's nothing really being made as far as progress, it would be useful to kind of have a heartbeat every few days just to kind of keep people in the loop. So that's that point. On to Elliot and John.
Thanks, Dennis. Yeah, so for ours point, it's we just started to notice more and more communication was happening either in DMs or in non-public, non-visible Slack groups or channels. So that's either one-on-one DMs or like small group DMs. Things where not everyone, the stakeholder, could see it or track it or be aware of it going on. And so we need to make sure it's happening in public channels. And for a lot of the times, what's works better for us, that is having the specific feature channels in Slack. So that's something we've done for the 11.9 cycle, is to have a lot more of the feature channels where the specific conversation, if it needs to be synchronous, goes there. Otherwise, it's in the issue. And on to Clement and Seth for Monitor.
Yep, so I can take this. Yeah, I just wanted to bring up one of the problems that we were having, which was mentioned earlier, is having a lot of small MRs that are interconnected, and there can be some confusion there with MRs that are, branches that are based off other branches, and they need to be merged in a certain order. So This issue, which is already out there and sort of planned out for specifying that an MR must be merged after another MR, will definitely help us in that regard. Will help communicate to maintainers if there are these interdependencies. Looks like it was originally planned for 11.9, but Dao pointed out that at the very earliest it'll be 11.10 and possibly it'll be pushed down further. So then on to Darby and John.
Great, thanks, Seth. So yeah, similar to Elliot's comments, we Release and Verify have some overlapping team members, so this topic came up as well. Same thing, we need to use the public channels more, so we're going to focus on that. Another thing that we noticed is a number of discussions kind of getting lost in a thread when people are using comments instead of discussions, and so we're just going to, for now, just start everything as a discussion, so we have the room to have that conversation there. And then there's an open issue that I think is being worked on to allow you to convert a comment to a discussion. So I think that will solve that problem down the road. But for now, we're just going to use a quick fix.
One second, Darby, just a quick question. Out of curiosity, both teams recognize the things need to happen in public channels, not in direct messages, like you mentioned, something we're going to work on. Do you have a strategy or approach, or is it not known yet?
Yeah. So I mean, basically, Elliot kind of touched on it. We're creating individual kind of topic channels in Slack so that those can happen there. Those discussions can happen in those sort of public channels, and then also just encouraging everyone to be more aware and more conscious of put these conversations in the public area, because everyone else can benefit from that. So I think it's probably something that we kind of need to remind teams of every once in a while, especially with newer people coming on. There's a lot of new people on Release, so it's pretty easy to trend into the private communication when you're not used to it. So a couple approaches there.
I just want to jump in here and say, maybe this is something we can put in the handbook. One thing I've noticed is that if you ask a question in a Slack channel, like not just for your teammates, but for another team, support might ask in our Slack channel about assistance with something, and they tend to not necessarily get answers unless they mention somebody specifically. So what often happens is I will get direct messages from other teams asking for help with a question that they may have already asked in a Slack channel. And what I've been trying to encourage people to do is direct mention me if they in a public channel rather than direct message me. So like, and maybe trying to codify that in the handbook and say like, it's okay to post in a team channel and mention the person that you were going to direct message. It's better than a private direct message if you want to speak directly to that person. That's something I've been trying to encourage, but it's hard to respond that way privately without discouraging them from trying to message you in future. And if you want people to, so that's something we maybe could think about codifying in the handbook.
It already is there. It's the communication guidelines, but obviously the handbook's really long, so I don't blame people for not remembering that. But it's I'll link to it in a second. Victor also has a habit of I'm just gonna call him out, replying to DMs in a public channel if it can be. In a public channel, if the answer can be in a public channel, he will just reply to the DM in the public channel. So it's sort of a nudge, but I think
yeah, I do exactly that. Thank you, Sean. And it looks weird, but it sometimes works. So, but you're not having to explain why you did it in the DM, which takes really long. I did that before, and then people are like, or don't know how to respond to that. So if you just simply quote unquote ignore them, but you just mention them in the channel to continue the conversation, sometimes it works. I give it 50% hit rate of it being successful.
Cool, thanks for humoring me there. Mech, you have one for quality.
Sure, thank you. So on the same lines of communication, quality department has rolled out guidelines. So this is high-level directives, explanations on how we conduct day-to-day operations and interact with our stable counterparts. So you will start seeing our engineers referring to this link if they're nudging you to fix tests, triage things. So everything is documented there as a single source of truth. With that, I will move on to performance and Stan.
Yeah, in the previous section, I mentioned that we've had a lot of customers upgrade to 11.5, 11.6. Most of our key customers tend to lag the latest version a bit, so you don't see the effects until later. And I would say this is one of the biggest risks we have as a company today because they're experiencing outages and support is jumping on these outages. I've had to jump on all of them the past month, and they're pretty bad. And then in my previous section, I talk about the main ones that I think are the problem. One of which is we cut off get access to Gitaly in these later 11 versions. And a lot of our customers haven't moved to a model without network file system. So the performance has been terrible and it's been almost unusable. So I think we really need to step our game up here. First of all, we need to start testing GitLab in the way our customers are using it right now. Until we get our customers off of NFS, we're going to have to live with it. And so there's an issue there talking about that. And then the second problem I identified is that there's just a lot of these N+1 queries. So every time you do one query, you might have to do 100 more to get the same information, to get all the information, and that over a network file system is disaster. Especially on a spinning disk. And so we need to fix these quickly. And there's an epic there that links to the highest priority ones. But this, I can't underscore how big of a problem this is because these are not one or two license customers. These are in the thousands. These are ultimate customers. This is going to continue to be a bigger problem as more and more of these customers upgrade. So,
yeah, I think Sid mentioned, you can think of these as $1 million outages. If you tally up the lost engineering time of our customers, it easily encroaches upon that level of financial loss. So these are quite important. So I know Mac has an issue, and I'm digging it up as we speak, about testing essentially like a 10K instance of GitLab. So something between that single node instance and GitLab.com. There's orders of magnitude in between those two. A lot of these big customers tend to be around 5,000, 7,500 engineers or something like that. So we're going to have an environment that's representative sort of 10K user environment, and we're going to stress test that. And then also there's another issue, which I did dig up already about, it's a little bit more of a drill down, but it's basically testing rollbacks. So that customers, when they go into these upgrades, they can roll back with confidence, because that's been one of the facets that customers have encountered. So Mac, if you have a chance, maybe you could dig up that issue you have about testing the 10K environment and link to that one. And I'm looking to the rollback one below here in the comments.
Sure.
And Stan, I should be aware of this, but we had another customer who upgraded a couple weekends ago. Did they have the same performance issues, or did we seem to?
This past weekend, there was one that they're monitoring it very closely. So far, it looks okay, I think, but it's still maybe early. One of our customers didn't actually escalate it until maybe 2 weeks later, so it was kind of this delayed burn.
Yeah, and I think it's also important to note that these customers are not going to change their hardware configuration as quickly as we'd like. So it's great to talk in terms of hey, we have a new architecture and it's better to move to the new architecture, but these hardware purchases are done on a much longer lead time and a much longer plan than our expectations. So we consequently need to make sure that we're supporting the product backwards at a much longer length than most people actually realize. Like, it wouldn't surprise me at all if 18 months from now we still have customers in this configuration. Excellent. So we have 1 minute left. I probably will go back through, and not probably, but I will go back through and look for major improvements for next release to track and make sure that we have people sign up. Is there anybody who would like to volunteer? Okay, consider yourselves warned that I can sometimes pull out all stops to assign work. So appreciate it. Any other thoughts before we close the call? All right. Thank you, everybody.